Hey there, this video is the second part to my Borderlands 3 retrospective. In this part, I'll be covering the 4 main DLCs, as well as any other post-launch content the game received. If you'd like to hear my thoughts on the base game and its story, please go watch part 1. It'll be linked down in both the description and the pinned comment. And with that aside, let's get to yapping. If Borderlands 3's base campaign left you cold with its inconsistent tone and underwhelming character work, the post-launch content might be where the game finally redeems itself. Released across 2020, the 4 major narrative DLCs, Moxxi's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot, Guns, Love and Tentacles, Bounty of Blood, and Psycho Krieg and the Fantastic Fustercluck represent a tonal course correction. Each expansion offers a tighter, more focused narrative with better pacing, sharper writing, and a much improved sense of character voice. Where the main stories struggle to balance comedy and consequence, the DLCs largely succeed by narrowing their scope. These aren't galaxy-spanning epics, but self-contained stories that lean into the series' strengths, memorable side characters, thematically consistent worlds, and a clearer understanding of when to be funny and when to take things seriously. They also happen to feature some of the best level design and world building in the entire game, each offering a unique visual identity and new mechanical gizmos that helps break up the standard campaign flow. Moxxi's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot is the most obvious crowd pleaser of Borderlands 3's DLC lineup, and for good reason. It taps directly into the franchise's strongest legacy, Handsome Jack, and builds an entire expansion around the aftermath of his reign. Set in a derelict space casino left running in Jack's absence, the DLC delivers a tightly constructed, thematically coherent experience that offers sharp level design, a memorable supporting cast, and a rare sense of restraint in its writing. The setup is simple. Moxxi wants revenge. Specifically, she wants to take back control of the Handsome Jackpot, a floating casino resort once built by Jack using stolen funds and slave labor. It's now overrun by hostile loader bots, stranded casino patrons, and psychopathic debt slaves who've been trapped inside since Jack's death. The Vault Hunter is brought in to assemble a crew, infiltrate the facility, and help Moxxi reclaim the casino's core, all while unraveling the chaos Jack left behind. It's a more focused story, and that's exactly why it works. There are no universe-ending stakes here, no forced cameos or overarching mythology to distract from moment-to-moment storytelling. What you get instead is a classic heist structure with solid pacing and a handful of well-written, tightly sketched characters. Ember, the pyromaniac eco-terrorist with a heart of gold, and Timothy Lawrence, Jack's guilt-ridden body double, are standout additions. Both are funny without being overbearing, and more importantly, they feel grounded, something the base game's cast rarely managed. Tonally, the writing here is far sharper. Jokes land more consistently, the characters are better realized, and Jack's presence, though mostly limited to audio logs and statues, is used intelligently. He's not resurrected or reduced to a meme. Instead, his legacy looms large, infecting every room, hallway, and spinning slot machine. The casino itself becomes a character, a decaying monument to corporate greed and unchecked narcissism, and the level design reflects that. Areas are filled with Jack-branded decor, propaganda, and malfunctioning security systems that turn the entire map into a constantly hostile theme park. From a gameplay perspective, the DLC doesn't dramatically alter the base game's core systems, but it does excel in encounter variety and map flow. The environments are denser and more vertical than most of the base game's areas, and combat arenas feel handcrafted. There are also new enemy variants, like specialized loaders and jackpot-themed mini-bosses, that provide a welcome shift in tactics. Loot-wise, Handsome Jackpot introduces a handful of new legendaries, cosmetic items, and class mods, but its main draw is the overall experience. It's not the most mechanically complex DLC, but it doesn't need to be. Its strength lies in its presentation, tone, and structure. 3 things the main campaign struggled with. Moxxi's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot feels like the developers finally remembered what made Borderlands 2's storytelling work. It's not about how loud or absurd the dialogue is. It's about giving characters clear motives, building a world around those motives, and letting the humor emerge from context rather than volume. It's a smaller story, but a better one, and it set a promising precedent for the DLCs that followed. If Moxxi's Heist was Borderlands 3 rediscovering structural focus, Guns, Love and Tentacles is where it rediscovers emotional tone and thematic coherence. Set during the chaotic lead-up to Wainwright Jacobs and Sir Hammerlock's wedding, the DLC leans fully into cosmic horror, gothic aesthetics, and character-driven storytelling. And the result? Arguably the most narratively satisfying content in the entire game. The story brings the Vault Hunter to Xylorgus, a frigid, forsaken planet haunted by an ancient Lovecraftian entity known as Githian. What should be a joyful wedding celebration quickly spirals into something more sinister when the couple's chosen venue, a mansion belonging to the occult-obsessed Olmsted family, turns out to be crawling with cultists, monsters, and eldritch corruption. The Vault Hunter is tasked with fending off an escalating horror show while helping the couple confront their own personal doubts and fears in the process. What immediately sets this DLC apart is how well it balances tone. Unlike the base game, which struggled to decide whether it wanted to be absurdist or serious, GLT commits to a gothic horror tone without losing the series' signature irreverence. The humor is dry, the stakes are personal, and the narrative pacing allows for actual character development. Wainwright slowly succumbing to the curse, Hammerlock's composed resolve, while still worrying about his partner, and the small tensions between them all are played with surprising sincerity. You care not just about stopping a cult, you care about whether these two characters will actually get married by the end of it. Supporting characters are equally strong. Gage, the returning necromancer from Borderlands 2, is repurposed here as the wedding planner, and this version of her is far more grounded than the one-note hyperactive persona she had in BL2. She brings levity, but also maturity, functioning as a stabilizing presence in a world full of literal chaos. Her robot companion Deathtrap returns as well, albeit more in function than in voice, and fans of the old dynamic will find just enough here to feel nostalgic without the game leaning too heavily into fan service. Visually, Xylorgus is a major departure from the usual Borderlands aesthetic. Snowy, wind-blasted landscapes give way to haunted forests, twisted towns, and gloomy libraries. The art direction channels clear Bloodborne and Call of Cthulhu influences, but refracted through the signature Borderlands lens, meaning there are still exploding barrels, loot chests, and shotgun-toting zealots around every corner. It works far better than it has any right to. Combat encounters are bolstered by new enemy types, including mutated wildlife, tentacled horrors, and cultists that use Githian-powered weapons and abilities. While mechanically they don't upend the formula, they do enough to shift the tactical rhythm of fights, especially when paired with more complex arena design and tighter pacing. They also feature some of the best death lines in the franchise. Thematically, this is the first time Borderlands 3 feels like it understands its own world. The presence of Githian connects back to the Iridians and Vault mythology in a more meaningful way than the main campaign ever managed, and the story touches, subtly but effectively, on ideas of transformation, obsession, and what it means to commit to someone in the face of entropy. It's not subtle, but it doesn't need to be. It's sincere, stylish, and surprisingly human. From a gameplay perspective, Guns, Love, and Tentacles adds a healthy spread of new loot, class mods, and cosmetics. But as with Moxxi's Heist, its greatest success is narrative. The writing is restrained, the characters are thoughtfully handled, and the overall presentation feels elevated. In a game often criticized for its overbearing tone, this DLC is proof that Borderlands can be funny, heartfelt, and coherent, all at the same time. Unlike previous DLCs, Bounty of Blood offers a self-contained western story on a new planet, featuring a cast of all new characters and a distinct narrative style. Set on the dusty frontier world of Gehenna, Bounty of Blood is framed as a classic tale of lawlessness and redemption. The Vault Hunter arrives in the dying town of Vestige to help put down the Devil Riders, a gang of mutant outlaws terrorizing the locals. What begins as a basic shootout for hire gradually spirals into a broader tale of corruption, greed, and ecological manipulation, all orchestrated behind the scenes by the megacorporation Jacobs. The first thing that stands out is the narrator. Rather than have characters deliver exposition through endless echo logs or shout dialogue at you mid-combat, the story is told through the lens of an unseen narrator, recounting your actions like a fireside folktale.
The wind on Gehenna was hot as spent powder. Smelled like tea.
It's a device that completely recontextualizes how the story is presented, and it's used to great effect. The narration is reflective, sardonic, and occasionally poetic, giving the DLC a measured tone that contrasts beautifully with the chaos unfolding on screen. It also allows the player's actions to feel part of a larger mythos, less like a series of objectives and more like chapters in a legend. Gehenna itself is arguably one of the most visually distinctive locations in the entire game. While previous planets emphasized biomes or corporate architecture, Gehenna is rooted in a Wild West aesthetic filtered through Borderlands sci-fi sensibilities. Dusty ravines, canyons lined with glowing crystals, steam-powered weaponry, and irradiated cacti that explode. The environment is designed to feel untamed and harsh, and it succeeds. This is a world that feels like it exists beyond your intervention. The cast of characters is also fresh, which ends up being one of its strengths. Characters like Juno and Rose are morally complicated and well realized, with arcs that unfold naturally as the story progresses. Juno in particular stands out as a kind of thematic mirror to the Vault Hunter, a skilled fighter driven by conflicting loyalties, whose ultimate fate is earned rather than forced. Bounty of Blood feels like it has something to say about change, about what gets lost in the process of trying to save a broken place. Gameplay-wise, the DLC introduces a few new mechanics that help distinguish it further. The Jet Beast, a hoverbike-style mount, provides faster traversal across Gehenna's wild open spaces. And environmental interactables like breeze blooms and teleporters allow for light puzzle solving and vertical exploration. New creature types, like the horse-inspired Belix and the cowboy-themed Devil Riders, shift combat dynamics slightly, although the moment-to-moment gunplay remains familiar. Loot-wise, the DLC introduces several new legendaries, along with new melee boosting gear and class mods that suit more experimental builds. But as with the other expansions, loot is not the main draw, the story is, and it's easily one of the best Borderlands has ever told. by committing fully to its Western aesthetic, focusing on an entirely new cast, and framing the player's journey through a compelling narrative lens. Bounty of Blood distinguishes itself not just as a good Borderlands DLC, but as a genuinely great standalone story within the universe. It may not have the emotional core of Guns, Love and Tentacles, or the legacy hook of Moxxi's Heist, but it more than makes up for it with atmosphere, voice, and thematic clarity. The fourth and final story DLC, Psycho Creek and the Fantastic Fustercluck, is the strangest of the bunch by a wide margin, and fittingly so. It trades structured plots and thematic subtlety for raw surrealism, leaning deep into psychological introspection, wrapped in maximalist chaos. On paper, it's the most Borderlands of the expansions. In practice, it's a surprisingly effective character study disguised as a fever dream. The premise is immediately more conceptual than any of the previous DLCs. Tannis has become obsessed with the idea of Valhalla, a mythical place she believes exists within the mind of Krieg, the unstable, axe-wielding psycho introduced in Borderlands 2. Using Iridian tech, she sends the Vault Hunter into Krieg's mind to uncover the truth, if it exists at all. What follows is a journey through fractured memories, violent metaphors, and literal manifestations of Krieg's trauma, rage, and fractured identity. At its core, this DLC is an exploration of mental health and duality, albeit filtered through a hyper-violent lens. Krieg is split into two personas, his calm inner voice and the screaming, chaotic outer psycho, and the DLC is structured around reconciling the two halves. As a narrative device, it works. The writing here treats Krieg with more empathy and nuance than one might expect, giving real weight to his struggle without completely abandoning the franchise's offbeat style. The balance isn't perfect, and the humor occasionally undercuts the heavier themes, but the overall tone is more thoughtful than the base game ever dared to be. Visually, the DLC fully commits to its premise. The environments are absurd, shifting from fractured environments to floating fortresses, meat gardens, and impossible landscapes stitched together from Krieg's memories and delusions. It's consistently inventive, and while it occasionally veers into sensory overload, the level design reinforces the fractured mental space the story inhabits. Hyperion personnel and Pandoran bandits for the most part, with bosses representing insecurity, guilt, and rage. Though mechanically they still don't differentiate much from the regular enemies. Structurally, the DLC is more linear than the previous three, with less emphasis on exploration and more on progression through defined narrative beats. Side quests are present, but minimal, with the focus clearly on moving the player through increasingly surreal sequences. What it lacks in freedom, it makes up for in pacing. The story maintains momentum and ends with an unexpectedly moving confrontation between Krieg's two personas, especially for a game infamous for crude humor. In the end, Fantastic Fustercluck is less about what Krieg does and more about who he is. It's loud, messy, and deeply chaotic, but so is its subject, and for once, that chaos feels earned. It's worth noting that I haven't dwelled much on the gameplay mechanics of each DLC, largely because, at their core, they remain mostly unchanged from the base experience, but only incremental tweaks here and there. Focusing too much on moment-to-moment gameplay would just devolve into me repeating myself ad nauseum, and these videos are long enough as is. That being said, the real distinctions of the four major DLCs lie in narrative, atmosphere, and character. While the four core DLCs formed the narrative backbone of Borderlands 3's post-launch support, Gearbox also delivered a wide variety of additional content, endgame challenges, seasonal events, experimental modes, and behind-the-scenes additions, all things that expanded the game's ecosystem in smaller, more varied ways. The quality was uneven, but the ambition was notable, and several of these additions offered welcome changes of pace from the usual looter-shooter grind. The most substantial of these were takedowns, essentially Gearbox's answer to Destiny 2's raids. The takedown at the Maluan Black Site and the takedown at the Guardian Breach are both high difficulty, high reward missions designed for coordinated 4-player teams, with scaling options introduced later to support solo players. These encounters emphasize tight combat design with multi-phase boss fights, environmental hazards, and punishing enemy density. They succeed in providing a true test of build quality and mechanical execution. The Maluan takedown in particular struck a strong balance between challenge and spectacle. It's tightly structured, cleanly paced, and doesn't overstay its welcome. The Guardian takedown, on the other hand, pushed too far into frustration territory at launch, featuring a checkpoint system that punished failure with excessive repetition and bloated difficulty. Gearbox eventually rebalanced it, but the core lesson was clear. Borderlands excels when it challenges players, but not when it punishes them for engaging with its most complex systems. Then came the seasonal events, beginning with Bloody Harvest for Halloween, Broken Hearts Day for Valentine's Day, and Revenge of the Cartels, a neon-soaked 1980s inspired event with a Scarface twist. These were limited time events with themed enemies, maps, cosmetic rewards, and unique loot pools. Of the three, Revenge of the Cartels is the standout. thanks to its vibrant visuals, solid arena design, and tongue-in-cheek humor that actually landed. Bloody Harvest was solid, if a little repetitive, especially for some of these challenges, while Broken Hearts Day felt more like a placeholder, as it quite literally is just shooting randomly spawning hearts to get some cosmetics. One of the more unexpected additions to Borderlands 3 was Borderlands Science, a tile-matching minigame tucked away on Sanctuary 3. Developed in partnership with scientists and researchers, the game tasks players with organizing DNA sequences, contributing to microbiome mapping efforts in the real world. Somehow, it's a surprisingly fun inclusion, quietly nestled inside a game known more for chaos than charity, and it offered small in-game rewards like currency and buffs for those who engaged with it. Also worth mentioning are the vault cards tied to the game's seasonal vault passes. These acted as grindable progression tracks, offering cosmetics, loot, and bonus objectives. While not particularly groundbreaking, they extended the game's replay loop and offered a structured reason to keep engaging with daily and weekly tasks. For players who live in the endgame, they were a decent incentive. For everyone else, they were easy to ignore. Gearbox also experimented with new gameplay structures through the Designer's Cut, which introduced Arms Race, a standalone survival mode stripped of traditional Borderlands progression. Players drop in with no gear, scavenge weapons on a shrinking map, and extract what they want to keep. Arms Race had mixed reception. Its slower pacing and isolated loot design felt antithetical to the rest of the game's chaos, but it offered an interesting change of rhythm. More importantly, the Designer's Cut added a 4th skill tree for each Vault Hunter, many of which significantly altered build variability. These new trees introduced fresh synergies and revived weaker builds, adding meaningful depth to the meta. The Director's Cut, released later, was more subdued. It added behind-the-scenes content, cut storyboards, and a series of short murder mystery missions called Mysterious Slayer, starring Ava, and surprisingly, they worked. Where Ava was divisive, at best, in the main campaign, here she was restrained, focused, and written with actual care. The missions are smaller in scope, with light investigation mechanics and eerie side plots that evoke the feel of a Borderlands-flavored X-Files episode. It's not revolutionary, but it does a decent enough job at warming the players up to Ava for when she eventually returns in the 4th game. The final mission in Ava's questline, Horror at Scryer's Crypt, is not only the strongest of the bunch, it's also the most thematically unsettling. It pits the player against the Seer, a cryptic, otherworldly entity that seems to exist outside the established rules of the universe. Unlike most bosses, the Seer isn't simply powerful, it appears to possess a metaphysical level of control over time itself, speaking in cryptic fragments that suggest it has seen, or perhaps even manipulated, alternate versions of the events across the Borderlands timeline. It references fractured moments, speaks with certainty about possible futures, and suggests that reality in this universe is more malleable than anyone realizes. Whether it's a one-off narrative experiment or a setup for the story of Borderlands 4, the encounter adds a surprising layer of existential dread and cosmic horror to a game that often forgets how to be subtle. It's a rare moment where Borderlands 3 gestures at something deeper than guns and punchlines, and actually sticks the landing. And finally, Hemoverus the Invincible is Borderlands 3's nod to the old school raid bosses of previous entries. Tucked away behind a hefty iridium fee, this hulking Varkit is an endurance test for max level Vault Hunters, boasting an absurd health pool, a never-ending horde of trash mobs, and multi-phase attacks that punish lumpy positioning. It's a fight designed less for casual farming and more for dedicated squads, or solo masochists with meticulously tuned builds, bringing back that mix of spectacle and grind-heavy challenge that longtime fans associate with Terramorphous from 2 and the funny crab guy from the original. Taken together, these post-launch additions reflect a studio trying to find new ways to stretch the Borderlands formula without breaking it. Not all of it worked. Some systems lacked staying power, others were clearly built for engagement metrics rather than creative expression, but the net effect was a more complete, more flexible version of the game that was launched in 2019. For players invested in the world, it offered plenty of reasons to keep coming back, and for those disappointed by the base game's shortcomings, it showed that Gearbox was willing to listen, iterate, and occasionally even get it right. Borderlands 3 is a complicated entry in a series that's always thrived on contradiction. Part looter-shooter, part interactive cartoon, part genre trailblazer, part dead meme generator. It arrived nearly 7 years after Borderlands 2, burdened with enormous expectations and a fanbase hungry for evolution. What it delivered was, in many ways, the most mechanically complete and technically robust game in the series, but also the one most at odds with its own identity. In terms of raw gameplay, Borderlands 3 stands as a high water mark. Its gunplay is tighter than ever, its class builds are the most versatile the series has seen, and its systems showcase a studio that had clearly internalized the best lessons of the genre it helped define. For pure moment-to-moment enjoyment, it's difficult to argue that any previous Borderlands title matches the refinement on display here. But Legacy isn't just about mechanics, it's about memory, and Borderlands 3 is a game that, despite its size and polish, struggles to linger in the cultural conversation the way its predecessor did. Borderlands 2 is remembered for Handsome Jack, for its guts, punching tonal shifts, for a narrative that understood when to be loud and when to be quiet. Borderlands 3, by contrast, is remembered just as often for what it failed to do: a mishandled main story, flat antagonists, and a writing style that often seemed more interested in being heard than being coherent. That said, Borderlands 3 is not a failure, far from it. It's a game that found its footing over time, through balance patches, thoughtful DLCs, and a community that continued to engage with it long after launch. The 4 major expansions, in particular, showcase what the base game could have been: focused, narratively sharp, and tonally consistent. Even Ava, once a poster child for the game's narrative missteps, saw a meaningful redemption arc in the mysteriously missions. It's a reminder that Borderlands 3 was never lacking in potential, only in restraint. Looking forward, the game's legacy is likely to be one of course correction and consolidation. It didn't reinvent the series, nor did it blow the doors off the genre, but it deepened the systems, modernized the structure, and laid a far more stable foundation than its predecessors. It's the most playable Borderlands, even if it's not the most memorable. If Borderlands 2 was a franchise's breakout moment, Borderlands 3 is its reflection: grander in scale, sharper in mechanics, but less sure of what it wants to say. And yet, for all of its flaws, it remains a game worth playing, worth revisiting, and worth analyzing. Because sometimes, legacy isn't about perfection, it's about what survives after the noise has died down. Borderlands 3 is a kind of sequel that arrives fully loaded, bursting with content, ambition, and confidence, but carrying just enough baggage to trip over its own boots. It's a game that excels where it counts most. The shooting feels incredible, the loot loop is endlessly rewarding, and the sheer volume of systems, builds, and content ensures that there's always something to tinker with or chase down. As a looter shooter, it delivers. As a continuation of one of gaming's most stylistically distinct franchises, it's a little more uneven. Its main campaign swings big but lands flat, undermined by one-note villains, tonal whiplash, and a cast of characters that often talk too much while saying too little. And yet, the post-launch support tells a different story. The DLCs are consistently strong, narratively focused, and filled with the kind of care and cohesion that the base game often lacked. Whether it's Moxxi's Heist tapping into legacy, Guns, Love and Tentacles digging into character work, or Bounty of Blood finding clarity in a new voice, these expansions prove that Gearbox still knew how to tell great stories, once they got out of their own way. Over time, Borderlands 3 became a better version of itself. Patches refined its rough edges, new skill trees deepened the meta. Even Ava, arguably the game's most controversial character, got a second chance and made good on it. It didn't reinvent the genre, and it didn't leave the cultural crater its predecessor did, but it showed growth. It evolved. And for a game built on chaos, that kind of quiet improvement is worth more than the loudest punchline. In the end, Borderlands 3 is a flawed but formidable sequel. Mechanically triumphant, narratively tangled, but ultimately worth the ride. Not perfect, not definitive, but unmistakably Borderlands. Thanks for watching to the end of this video. If you enjoyed, do all the YouTube things. And as always, I've been Xeniverse, and I'm off to master a tabletop game.